Hey everyone, it's Phil Hall of West Fair Communications, and I am privileged to have with me on today's episode Robert Withers, who is President and CEO of M1 Capital Corporation. Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
It's my pleasure, Phil.
Well, Robert, I think I'm not exaggerating if I were to say that 2020 might be the year from hell for the commercial real estate world in so many ways. Office buildings being empty because of the pandemic, retail stores are closing, uh, hotels are empty, and now that we're starting to move a little bit beyond the pandemic and start to reopen the economy, we have unrest across the country, which is bringing destruction to a lot of commercial properties. How is the commercial real estate industry responding to what seems to be a nonstop assault against its very existence?
Thank you for your question, Phil. From what I've seen so far, quite the CRE, as I refer to it, industry is extremely resilient. Extremely resilient. We're going to have some issues that we're going to have to work out, or the industry itself is going to have to work out. Obviously, office space, the office space landscape is changing. People are finding, or employers are finding, that their employees can work from home easily, or easier, more easy than they expected. I think there are going to be segments of the CRE that are going to be more affected by others, and that is hospitality, restaurant, large restaurant chains, small buildings that were anchored by restaurants, and office space to a certain degree. And that might be Class B office space and such. Now, on the other side, the multifamily section or sector of the CRE industry is strong. Surprisingly, rent collections for April and May were relatively strong. There were some pockets of delinquencies, but for the most part, I think, from what I'm hearing, a lot of the larger national landlords are very surprised and happy with the fact that that rents remained relatively stable. Rent collections remained relatively stable. Having said that, we're going to need to see. It's relatively new. This is relatively still new. I mean, let's face it. We really started to see the meltdown, as I'll call it, start in April, and we just started June. So I think it's fair enough to see that we're going to need to. Fair enough to say that we're going to need to see a 6-month time frame where we're going to need to see how these properties perform, what rent collections look like in the fall, historically for that 6-month period of time, and also perhaps how mortgage delinquencies, because let's face it, connected to obviously rent collections and the stability of these properties come mortgage lenders. And mortgage lenders, depending on, the landlord, and most of the larger landlords nationally have a tremendous amount of debt tied to these properties. So it's going to be interesting to see how they perform. The commercial mortgage-backed security sectors, and also the agency, Fannie and Freddie, lending apparatuses that are out there. I think that time will tell. Time will tell. But so far, what I'll say in one word: resiliency.
Okay. Let's start with the office sector of CRE world. Are you predicting companies are going to either try to renegotiate leases with landlords or just break their leases if they realize that their workforce is just as efficient from home as it is concentrated in a single office?
Good question, Phil. I think landlords would rather renegotiate. Let's face it, having a tenant at a lower rate is better than having no tenant at all. And the chances of actually releasing that space right now, given the environment, is probably not something they would prefer to do. Um, I think that it depends on, and what I've also heard is a lot of landlords opting to use their security deposit to defer payments. So they'll use their security deposit as a credit, and using that money as a credit towards their rent that's not been paid, they'll dip into their security deposit accounts to be able to keep the cash flow going and keep the tenant up to date as much as possible. But there lies another issue, and that is replenishing that security deposit down the line. So, there's going to be a negotiation that lenders are going to have with their individual that owners are going to have with their individual tenants. I think that's probably a case-by-case basis. I think you'll see a lot of renegotiation of leases in the hospitality and restaurant industries, small and large. Office space, depending on in the area, may be an issue. But, there's two, it seems to be two avenues of thought in regards to this. I've heard large landlords and property owners say working at home is overplayed. The companies are going to still want a presence, an office. Well, you think about it, large CPA firms, law firms, .com company or tech companies. They're going to want a presence. They're going to want to see an actual office, and people like going into their office. What they don't like is commuting. Yeah. And that's the issue. They don't want to get on a train or a subway to be able to get to their office. I hear you, Phil. I hear you. We have an office in Manhattan. Our headquarters is in White Plains. And I visited it in the beginning of the pandemic just to make sure everything was tidied up. But, my employees that are in that office have been told to work out of home, which is we're a relatively small company, so it's manageable. But I can tell you now that I don't know. I for one will keep my office presence. I think that we should, because I think working at home comes with a whole nother set of issues, and I'm sure you can appreciate that because you've probably been working.
Oh yeah, I've been working.
And it starts with the dog barking. And if you have young children, them coming along into your Zoom meetings, but it can also go out to many other issues. So.
Yeah, I've been working from home actually since 2013. So this is I'm used to it, or maybe I'm
You're a veteran.
Yes.
You're a veteran.
And we have the dog barking. We have two dogs next door that usually start barking whenever I start doing one of these Zoom videos. But those are the circumstances that prevail. But what happens in areas where there's already a glut of office space? I'm thinking of Stamford, Connecticut, for example, which has more office space than it really needs, or a lot of the old corporate parks that don't seem to be as attractive today as they were 2 or 3 decades ago.
Good question again, Phil. Time will tell. I don't mean to be vague, but those properties may need to be repositioned. They may need to be worked out. I don't expect that we're going to see a run on office space anytime soon. So, there are some sectors of the CRA market that look hot, quite frankly. And also, there is a phenomenon going on. And by the way, those sectors are like, for instance, medical space, very important right now. It seems to be relatively hot there. But there also is the phenomenon of New York and urban city located companies that, because of the transportation issue, because of their employees not wanting to get on trains and buses to come into the city, will now look to rent smaller space in the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And although Stamford's a city, a Manhattan firm who wants to cater, or let's put it this way, wants to help their employees locally or accommodate their employees locally who live locally, may open up an office in Stamford or locally, so that they don't have to commute into the city.
Yeah.
And I've seen that. I've seen larger companies, and how I've seen that is through the brokers, the commercial real estate brokers that I work with, and they say that they're seeing a lot of companies inquire about space in more suburban areas, office space in more suburban areas to accommodate those employees. So,
one of the more distressing aspects of my job is writing about a lot of national retail chains and restaurant chains that are either closing locations or closing altogether. And retail has been suffering for some time thanks to e-commerce. In some markets, it's really quite dramatic. If you go down into New York City, even before the pandemic and all the unrest, you could just walk up and down Broadway and Fifth Avenue, and there's so many closed stores and signs for lease. What's going to happen there? I can't imagine there's going to be a new wave of retail chains coming in to take over these vacant spaces.
yeah. I think that we're going to see a vacancy issue retail-wise for the foreseeable future. As far as Manhattan is concerned, it's a different, that's a whole different market.
Yeah.
You know, when you look at Manhattan, you have to look at it, I don't want to say in a bubble, but there are needs in Manhattan, and things happen very quickly in Manhattan, so that those spaces could eventually be repurposed into other types of office retail spots. Problem is you're taking one of the big users of those space, which is the restaurant industry, out of the equation for now, because I don't know when it's going to be that people are going to feel that comfortable shuffling into a overcrowded restaurant. That's going to be a while.
Yeah.
And I think so retail may take a different, and it's not up to me, it's up to the creativeness of our economy, of the business community, and the real estate owners to come up with an idea of what to do with these retail spots. I can tell you though that vacancies in buildings where there is a mixed use component, where there's residential on top and commercial units on the bottom, we're really looking at the residential part of it, which is relatively stable in regards to its cash flow expectations. Retail is always the big question. So other than other businesses that don't require businesses that don't require high density, I don't know what the solution is going to be for that, Phil. It's a good question.
And there's also a problem too that a lot of the existing retail space doesn't really fit the needs of potential tenants. I've had conversations with real estate brokers who said they had been in touch with restaurant chains that are very popular in the South and the Midwest, and they want to come up to the Northeast, to Connecticut area where I'm based, but the available real estate, it just doesn't fit their needs. Most likely it's too small, or it's in the wrong location. So it's sort of a lose-lose situation, because there are potential tenants out there, but the existing space just doesn't meet their needs.
Correct. Landlords in high-end, I'm thinking Greenwich Avenue, in Greenwich, Connecticut, small retail spots, apartments on top, and they were able to get big dollars for renting those small retail spots. I don't know if that's going to be the case going forward. Impossible to put a restaurant in there that works now, because the table count would not meet, and the occupancy, who knows how occupancy maximums are going to be scattered now. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. One thing I will tell you, do not underestimate the real estate community.
No.
I have learned a long time ago. I've been in Westchester over 30 years involved in this industry, and I've seen ups and downs, and somehow, some way, creative minds get together and come up with a solution. I'm not being Pollyanna about it. I think we're facing a real issue right now. We have a combination of an already under siege asset class, which was retail, combined with a pandemic. So I think we have challenges in front of us, but my money is on the CRE industry. I think they'll come up with a solution.
I agree with you on that. I want to talk about an area of CRE that a lot of folks don't really focus on, at least here in the New York metro area, and that's manufacturing. I think one of the lessons we're learning from the pandemic is maybe it's not a good idea to have most of your products and items and manufactured in one country. But is there the appropriate real estate to encourage manufacturers to set up shop in the New York metro area, in Westchester, in Connecticut, in Jersey, or Long Island? There are a lot of old factories that have been closed for years and definitely would need to be repurposed. But is this practical to think we can bring manufacturing back, and do we have the real estate to do it?
The answer to the second question is yes. Look around. You'll see plenty of buildings that are not being right now utilized in highest and best way or at all. And I think with proper tax incentives by the municipalities and incentives and whole by municipalities, I could see that happening. I remember when the governor first came out in the beginning of the pandemic and said that New York was going to start manufacturing its own hand sanitizer.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yes, the prison did that upstate.
Exactly.
Yes.
I was incredibly proud of that. Well, I was happy to hear that. Let's put it that way. I was really happy to hear that because I think it's going to take initiatives like that. Ground floor, real grassroots thinking of, okay, so we have a problem. How do we fix it? Well, right then and there, we needed hand sanitizer. So you know what? We're going to start making it. We're not going to rely on the normal distribution channels for that. And I think more thinking like that and thinking outside the box is needed. And the CRE industry is known for that. So I think it's going to be an interesting time. And so to answer your question, I think manufacturing is something I would love. Listen, across the board, that makes sense for our country. Let's right. We're putting people to work. Things are being made here. We have more of a self-reliance instead of worrying about other countries providing that information, which also controls the prices. Uh-huh. And I think, for certain things, we learned a lesson in regards to PPE. We need to make certain things here.
Yes. You keep using the word resiliency, and there's something which came to mind because you mentioned hospitality, and I'm thinking lodging in particular. The lodging industry had massive layoffs because obviously people aren't using hotels or going on vacation. But unlike retail chains or the restaurant chains, I'm not aware of any hotel chain going out of business. So I'm suspecting that the lodging sector might actually be a very happy surprise and could bounce back faster than many people would expect.
Yes, well, it did, if you remember, after 9/11. Yeah. Very quickly. Well, quickly enough. And I think it's because the hospitality industry uses an influx of non-trained, or let's put it this way, minimally trained individuals or people who can come in very quickly, be trained to the hotel or the hospitality group standards and employ them into the business. So I see, quite frankly, that industry being able to be very nimble in getting restarted. And New York is a destination. Mm-hmm. We have our problems. Listen, nobody knows. I'm a New Yorker my whole life. Born and bred, came from the Bronx, moved up to Westchester. I've seen this state go through hell and back, quite frankly. But I'll tell you one thing, it still attracts people, and I will continue to attract people. And I'm not just talking about Times Square. Yeah. I'm talking about the state as a whole. The state as a whole will continue to attract people. So I think, although maybe the hospitality industry will go through a change and maybe get a little leaner and meaner, I have good expectations that it will return.
Whereabouts in the Bronx are you from?
I'm sorry, sir?
Where in the Bronx are you from?
Pelham Bay.
Oh, I'm from the Riverdale Kingsbridge area.
Very well known.
Yeah.
Some people say Riverdale is really not the Bronx; it's part of Manhattan.
Yeah.
I remember growing up, they would say that it's really more of an enclave of Manhattan. But I know it's the Bronx, and I love Riverdale. So.
Oh, it is the Bronx, and when you listen to the people speak, you know where you are. I think geographically, the little Spite and Dival enclave is technically part of Manhattan because of the way the boroughs were mapped out back in the 19th century, but that's another story. What about one last thing in terms of CRE, and it's another sector that a lot of people don't often focus on, that's the self-storage industry. Where do you see that going in the near future?
I think it's going to be very strong. I think self-storage is going, storage as a whole, logistics is going to be very strong. Now, obviously, people storing items, I think there's going to be a lot of moving.
Yeah.
Bill, I think we're going to see a lot of moving for the time being. People, I was sharing this with this morning with a colleague. We were talking about a transaction, and she happens to be moving from the city very quickly. She's young and she's pregnant, and she wants to get out of the city now. She just bought a house in Pelham, and she wants to get out of the city now, obviously for many things that are going on. And I shared with her that I heard a statistic the other day on a West Fair, one of your seminars that was provided, that 2,500 people have moved from the city to Fairfield County and Upper Westchester in the past 60 days.
Wow.
2,500 people have said that they are relocating to those areas, and it's been over the past 60 days. Now, think about that. You know, there's going to be a tremendous need for storage, one way or another. And I'm just using that small segment of this country's population as an example. People are going to be moving out of urban areas that they consider more problematic. I won't say dangerous, but more problematic for them bringing up a family, and moving them into urban, suburban areas. And because of that, storage will be needed one way or another. It's also, I think, just moving. People, you know, downsizing, they will need storage. And logistics-wise, storage is very important. The storing of goods across this nation. You just take a look at the thoroughfare going through New Jersey. The main, just take a look at the New Jersey Turnpike on either side of it, and look at the logistics companies. And this is a relatively new phenomenon. So I'm very bullish on storage.
And not just storage of material objects, but also data storage, data centers as well.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Well, the cloud, yes. I mean, let's face it, we're headed in that direction. My industry has embraced it fully. You know, more and more of our work is done in the cloud. So there's going to be more need for data storage and server locations throughout the nation.
And that might actually be a good strategy for a lot of the office spaces that cannot be filled, or even the retail spaces. They could be repurposed for data centers and for self-storage.
Correct. Again, depending on the people who house those facilities or those items are used to paying a different rent base
Yeah.
than I think a lot of the landlords in those retail spots are willing to accommodate. Let's just put it that way. But listen, you know, anything's possible. And like I said in the beginning of our interview, Phil, some rent is better than no rent. So I think you'll see a reckoning there one way or another.
Well, Robert Withers, I'd love to keep discussing this with you, but our time is coming to a close. But for the viewers that would like to continue the conversation with you, where can they get in touch with you?
Thank you, Phil. You can reach me at info@mortgage1. That's info@mortgage1.com. Also, we just came out with a great article that's in the Hudson Gateway Association's newsletter that came out this past month. I'd love to send any of your viewers or listeners a copy of that article having to do with the industry and the challenges facing it right now.
Excellent. Robert Withers, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Phil, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And for the invitation.
Very good. And folks, I'll see you again next week. Have a good one.